In the ancient territories where silver moonlight kissed the peaks of the Shadowmere Mountains, the Silver Moon Pack had thrived for over 1,000 years. Their bloodline carried the old magic, the kind that whispered through dreams and sang in the wind during the darkest hours of night. Among them, few possessed the gift as strongly as Ashrain, known to his friends as Ash, a 21-year-old Omega whose very presence seemed to make the air shimmer with untapped power. Ash was unlike any Omega the pack had seen in generations. Where most Omegas were small and delicate, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, his frame more reminiscent of an alpha than his designated role suggested. His dark hair held streaks of silver that caught the moonlight, and his eyes were the deep blue of midnight storms. But it was his magic that truly set him apart. Blood magic so ancient and powerful that the pack elders whispered he might be the chosen one spoken of in their oldest prophecies. The fated bond had appeared to him in dreams long before his 21st birthday, visions of silver threads connecting his soul to another. In those dreams, he saw glimpses of his destined mate. Golden hair, fierce amber eyes, and the overwhelming presence of an alpha born to lead. When he finally laid eyes on Kalar, heir to the Silver Moon Pack and the strongest alpha of his generation, Ash knew without doubt that fate had chosen them for each other. Kalar stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his muscular frame speaking of countless hours of training and natural physical dominance. His golden hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his amber eyes held the kind of confidence that made even other alphas step aside. He was everything an alpha should be: strong, decisive, and utterly certain of his place in the world. The pack looked to him not just as their future leader, but as the embodiment of everything they valued about their kind. The mating festival arrived with the full moon of autumn, when the veil between worlds was thinnest and fated bonds were strongest. The entire pack gathered in the sacred grove, their excitement creating an almost tangible energy in the crisp night air. Ash had spent days preparing for this moment, his blood magic singing in harmony with the approaching celestial event. The silver mark that had appeared on his wrist, the physical manifestation of his fated bond, pulsed with warm light beneath the ceremonial wrappings. As the moon reached its zenith, Elder Thorn raised his staff and called for the bonding ceremony to begin. Tonight, under the blessing of our Silver Mother, those called by fate will step forward and claim their eternal bonds. Let the moon's chosen reveal themselves. Ash stepped forward, his heart pounding with anticipation and joy. Around the sacred circle, other wolves were moving toward their destined mates, but all eyes were on him as he approached Kalar. The future alpha stood at the center of the grove, magnificent in his ceremonial robes, waiting to see who fate had chosen for him. With trembling fingers, Ash unwrapped the silver mark on his wrist, revealing the intricate pattern that matched the one he knew would appear on Keeler's skin. The mark glowed with ethereal light, and gasps echoed through the gathered pack as they recognized the ancient symbols of the strongest fated bonds. Kalar, Ash said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent grove. The moon has chosen us. I offer you my bond, my magic, my heart. For a moment, Kalar stared at the glowing mark, his expression unreadable. Then his face twisted with something that looked like disgust mixed with disbelief. What is this joke? Keeler's voice boomed across the grove, his alpha authority making even the elders step back. You, my fated bond? Even fate sometimes makes mistakes. The words hit Ash like physical blows, but worse was yet to come. Kalar reached out and grasped Ash's wrist, his touch burning against the sacred mark. I will never bind myself to an Omega who looks like an alpha but has the soul of a pretender, Kalar continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the grove. You are an aberration, a mistake of nature. The pack needs pure bloodlines, not confused anomalies. With a sharp motion that sent lightning through Ash's entire body, Kalar tore the silver mark from his wrist and cast it into the ceremonial fire. The sacred symbol burned with silver flames, and with it, Ash felt something fundamental break inside his soul. The pain was indescribable. It felt like having his heart ripped from his chest while every nerve in his body screamed in agony. The severed fated bond left jagged edges that pulsed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of what had been destroyed. Around him, The pack erupted in shocked whispers and cruel laughter. "The freak got rejected," someone called out. "Even fate doesn't want him," another voice added. Ash fell to his knees in the center of the grove, his blood magic flickering and dying as the shock overwhelmed his system. Through his tears, he could see the faces of his packmates. Some showed pity, others disgust, but most just looked away as if he were something too shameful to acknowledge. His mother, Lydia, pushed through the crowd and looked down at him with cold disappointment. "You have brought shame to our family name," she said, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "I disown you as my son. You are no longer part of our bloodline." The formal rejection from his own mother was the final blow. Ash's magic, already weakened by the severed bond, collapsed entirely. The silver streaks in his hair began to fade, and the mystical aura that had always surrounded him dimmed to nothing. Elder Thorn approached with the ceremonial branding iron, its tip glowing red-hot. "By the laws of our kind, you are marked as broken, cast out from the Silver Moon Pack for the crime of false bonding." The brand burned into Ash's shoulder, the smell of searing flesh mixing with the smoke from the ceremonial fire. The mark would identify him forever as a rejected Omega, unwanted and unworthy of pack protection. "You have until sunrise to leave our territory," Kalar commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. "If you are found here after dawn, you will be hunted as a rogue." Somehow Ash found the strength to stand. His legs shook beneath him, and his vision blurred with pain and tears, but he managed to walk away from the grove with what little dignity he had left. Behind him, the ceremony continued as if he had never existed, other couples completing their sacred bonds, while he stumbled into the darkness alone. The journey away from pack territory was a nightmare of physical and emotional agony. Ash's body, already weakened by the severed bond, struggled with the basics of survival. His blood magic, once strong enough to heal wounds and commune with the spirits of the forest, had been reduced to barely a flicker. He could no longer hear the whispers of the wind or feel the pulse of life in the earth beneath his feet. For 3 days, he wandered through the wilderness, surviving on stream water and the few berries he could find. His clothes, torn by thorns and stained with his own blood, hung in tatters on his increasingly gaunt frame. The brand on his shoulder had become infected, adding fever and delirium to his growing list of ailments. On the 4th night, as Ash collapsed beside a small creek in what he dimly recognized as vampire territory, he no longer cared about the danger. Death seemed preferable to the constant ache of his severed bond and the crushing weight of his rejection. He closed his eyes beside the water and let the fever take him, expecting never to wake again. But consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the sensation of cool stone beneath his body and the scent of old magic in the air. Ash opened his eyes to find himself in a vast chamber carved from black stone, lit by floating orbs of blue flame that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Ancient tapestries depicted scenes of battles between various supernatural creatures, and shelves lined with mysterious artifacts stretched from floor to ceiling. "So," a voice said from the shadows, smooth and cold as winter wind, "the dying wolf awakens." Ash turned his head slowly, his neck stiff from whatever ordeal had brought him here. In the corner of the chamber, a figure stepped forward into the light, and Ash's breath caught in his throat. The being before him was undeniably a vampire, but unlike any he had ever imagined. Velhares stood well over 6 feet tall, his pale skin seeming to glow with an inner light. His hair was white as fresh snow, hanging in a straight curtain to his shoulders, and his eyes were the deep crimson of fresh blood. He wore robes of midnight blue that seemed to shift and move like liquid shadow, and an aura of ancient power surrounded him like a tangible presence. "I am Velhares, Lord of the Crystal Castle and Master of the Northern Reaches," the vampire continued, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "You were found dying on my lands, wolf. By ancient law, that makes you my property until such time as you can repay the debt of your rescue." Ash tried to sit up, but his weakened body refused to cooperate. "I have nothing to offer you, Lord," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am broken, cast out, Worthless even to my own kind. Worthless. Velhairs moved closer, his crimson eyes studying Ash with curious intensity. I can smell the old magic on you, even diminished as it is. Blood magic, unless I'm mistaken. Quite rare among your kind. It's gone, Ash said bitterly. When my bond was severed, my magic died with it. Magic doesn't die, Velhairs replied, his tone matter-of-fact. It merely sleeps, waiting for the right circumstances to awaken again. But that is a matter for another time. Right now, you owe me a life debt, and I intend to collect. Over the following days, Ash learned the terms of his captivity. Velhairs required very little from him. Silence when the vampire was working, basic maintenance of the castle's lower levels, and his presence during certain magical rituals where his dormant blood magic could serve as a stabilizing influence. I do not require love, Velhairs told him on his first day of service. I do not require friendship or companionship. I require only silence and obedience. You will speak when spoken to, work when commanded, and otherwise make no demands upon my time or attention. It should have been a miserable existence, but Ash found unexpected peace in the vampire's cold indifference. After the crushing weight of pack expectations and the humiliation of his rejection, being treated as nothing more than a useful object was almost a relief. There were no disappointed glances, no whispered criticisms, no constant reminders of his failure. Just silence and the gentle rhythm of daily tasks. The Crystal Castle was a marvel of vampire architecture, carved directly into a mountain peak and filled with wonders that spoke of centuries of accumulated wealth and knowledge. Libraries containing books in languages Ash had never seen, laboratories where alchemical experiments bubbled and steamed, observatories where the movements of stars and planets were tracked with mechanical precision. Velhairs himself was an enigma, ancient beyond measure. He seemed to exist in a state of perpetual winter, his emotions as controlled and distant as his crimson eyes suggested. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of vast experience and hard-won wisdom. In the evenings, he would read aloud from ancient texts, his voice filling the great hall with stories of civilizations that had risen and fallen millennia before Ash's pack had even existed. At first, Ash thought the reading was part of some ritual or magical practice. But gradually, he began to suspect that Velhairs was simply lonely, using the excuse of magical necessity to have some form of companionship without admitting to the need. The vampire never touched him, never demanded anything beyond the basic services outlined in their arrangement. But sometimes, late at night when the reading was finished, Ash would catch Velhairs watching him with an expression that was almost curious, as if the vampire were trying to solve some puzzle that Ash represented. The first sign that their relationship was evolving beyond simple master and servant came 3 weeks into Ash's captivity. He had been cleaning the castle's extensive gardens when he discovered a wounded raven caught in one of the defensive wards that protected the property. The bird's wing was badly damaged, and it would surely die without help. Without thinking, Ash reached out with his magic, seeking to heal the creature's injuries. To his surprise, the blood magic that had been dormant since his rejection flickered to life, weaving through his fingers in threads of silver light. The healing was weak and incomplete compared to his former abilities, but it was enough to mend the raven's wing and free it from the ward's grip. Interesting, Velhairs said from behind him, and Ash spun around in shock. The vampire had approached silently, as was his nature, and now stood watching with those unreadable crimson eyes. I'm sorry, Lord, Ash said quickly. I didn't ask permission to use magic on your grounds. I just couldn't watch it suffer. And yet you believe your magic is dead, Velhairs observed, ignoring the apology. When clearly it lives, merely changed by your experiences. The vampire knelt beside the now healthy raven, which hopped onto his extended finger without fear. What is your name, Wolf? Your true name, not whatever title your pack gave you. The question caught Ash off guard. No one had asked his name since his exile, as if his identity had been erased along with his pack membership. Ash Rain, he said softly. But everyone calls me Ash. Ash Rain. Velhairs repeated, and somehow the ancient vampire's pronunciation made the name sound like music. A good name. Strong. It suits you better than I expected. From that day forward, their interactions changed subtly. Velhairs began addressing him by name rather than simply Wolf. During the evening readings, the vampire would occasionally ask Ash's opinion on a particular passage or historical event. Small conversations began to develop around their daily routines. "Why do you live alone?" Ash asked one evening as they sat by the great fireplace. Velhairs reading from a book of ancient poetry while Ash mended torn tapestries. "Because solitude is simpler than the alternative," Velhairs replied without looking up from his book. "Others bring complications, expectations, eventual disappointment. Solitude brings only peace. Don't you ever get lonely?" Velhairs was quiet for so long that Ash thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, the vampire set down his book and looked directly at him. "Loneliness is the price of immortality," he said. "Everyone you might care for will age and die while you remain unchanged. Better to avoid such attachments entirely than to endure their inevitable loss." "But doesn't that mean you're always alone? Even when you're with others?" "Yes," Velhairs said simply. "It does." The honesty in that admission created something between them that Ash couldn't quite name. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition of shared isolation. They were both outcasts in their own ways. Ash rejected by his pack, Velhairs choosing solitude over the pain of repeated loss. Winter deepened around the crystal castle, bringing storms that shook even the ancient stone walls. During one particularly fierce blizzard, the castle's heating system failed, leaving most of the structure dangerously cold. Velhairs, being undead, was unaffected by the temperature, but Ash's mortal body began to succumb to hypothermia. The vampire found him collapsed in the library. His lips blue with cold and his breathing shallow and irregular. Without hesitation, Velhairs gathered Ash into his arms and carried him to his own private chambers, where a magical fire burned eternally in the hearth. "Stay with me," Velhairs commanded as he settled Ash beside the fire and wrapped him in layers of warm furs. "Keep breathing. Do not give up now." For 3 days, Velhairs tended to Ash with a dedication that went far beyond the simple protection of property. He fed him warm broth, monitored his temperature, and sat vigil beside the fire to ensure the flames never dimmed. When Ash's fever broke and he finally opened his eyes to find the vampire watching over him, something fundamental had shifted between them. "Thank you," Ash whispered, his voice still weak but filled with genuine gratitude. "You are welcome," Velhairs replied, and for the first time since they had met, his voice carried warmth instead of cold formality. "Why did you save me? I'm just a broken Omega. No use to anyone." Velhairs was quiet for a moment, his crimson eyes reflecting the firelight. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I have grown accustomed to your presence. The castle seems too quiet when you are not in it." It was as close to an admission of affection as the ancient vampire was likely to make, but Ash understood the significance. He had somehow managed to penetrate the walls that Velhairs had built around his heart over centuries of self-imposed isolation. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it news from the outside world that would change everything. Traders passing through vampire territory carried reports of growing tension between the various supernatural communities. The werewolf packs were becoming increasingly militant, demanding that other species submit to their authority or face the consequences. Vampires, fae, and other magical beings were being forced to choose between subservience and war. The catalyst for the brewing conflict came in the form of a small boy who stumbled into the castle grounds during a late spring rainstorm. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with the distinctive features of a half-blood. Partly human, partly werewolf, belonging fully to neither world. Ash found him collapsed near the castle gates, his small body covered in cuts and bruises that spoke of recent abuse. The child's scent carried the taint of fear and desperation, mixed with the faint traces of werewolf magic that marked his mixed heritage. "Please," the boy whispered as Ash knelt beside him. "Don't send me back to them. I'll be good, I promise. I won't be any trouble." "Who hurt you?" Ash asked gently, his protective instincts overwhelming any concern for protocol. "The pack found me hiding in their territory," the child replied. "They said half-bloods are abominations that need to be cleansed from the world. They were going to kill me, but I got away." Ash felt a familiar rage building in his chest. The same narrow-mindedness that had led to his own rejection was now being used to justify violence against children, whose only crime was existing outside traditional categories. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ilian," the boy said. "But I don't have a pack name. My mother was human, my father was a rogue wolf. Nobody claims me." "Well, Ilian," Ash said, making a decision that would change all their lives, "I claim you. You're safe now." He carried the injured child into the castle, where Velhairs took one look at the situation and immediately summoned medical supplies. The vampire examined Ilian's wounds with the same careful attention he had shown to Ash during his recovery, his immortal hands gentle as he cleaned cuts and applied healing salves. "He can stay," Velhairs said without being asked. "Children should not suffer for the prejudices of adults." Over the following weeks, Ilian proved to be a remarkable addition to their strange household. His mixed heritage had left him with unusual abilities. He could shift partially between human and wolf form, had enhanced senses even in human shape, and possessed an intuitive understanding of magic that surprised even Velhairs. More importantly, his presence brought out protective instincts in both Ash and the vampire that neither had expected to feel. They found themselves working together to provide Ilian with the stability and affection he had never received, creating a family unit that defied every conventional definition but somehow worked perfectly. "Am I your son now?" Ilian asked one evening as they shared dinner in the castle's great hall. Ash looked at Velhairs, unsure how to answer. They had never formally discussed their relationship or their roles in Ilian's life, but the boy's question forced them to confront the reality of what they had become. "If you would like to be," Velhairs said carefully, "then yes, you are our son. Does that make you my parents?" "It makes us your family," Ash replied, and felt something warm and right settle in his chest as he said the words. "We choose to love you and protect you, and you choose to be our son. That's all family really is, people who choose each other." Ilian beamed at them both. "Then I choose you too. Both of you." Their peaceful domestic life was shattered one morning when scouts from the Silver Moon Pack appeared at the castle gates under a flag of parley. Ash watched from the battlements as Velhairs met with their representatives, his enhanced hearing allowing him to catch fragments of the conversation. The pack was demanding the return of stolen property, namely Ash himself. They claimed that as a member of their bloodline, he remained under pack authority regardless of his exile status. More concerning, they were also demanding the surrender of any half-bloods or impure beings harbored within vampire territory. "The wolf known as Ashrain has been branded as a traitor to his species," the lead scout declared. "He consorts with vampires, adopts abominations, and spreads poison against the natural order. By pack law, he must be returned for proper punishment." "And what would that punishment be?" Velhairs asked, his voice carrying deadly calm. "Death, most likely. Along with the half-blood child he has corrupted with his presence." The vampire's response was immediate and final. "No, this is not a request, vampire. This is a demand backed by the authority of the Allied Pack Coalition. Return our property or face the consequences." "The only property I see here," Velhairs replied, his power beginning to manifest as frost forming in the air around him, "is this conversation, which I now declare finished. Leave my lands immediately." The scouts departed with threats and promises of retribution, but Ash knew the respite would be temporary. The packs were organizing for war, and the Crystal Castle had become a symbol of everything they opposed. Cross-species cooperation, acceptance of outcasts, and the defiance of traditional hierarchies. "We could leave," Ash suggested that evening as they discussed their options. "Take Ilian and go somewhere far from pack territory. You have the resources to start over anywhere in the world." "Running away won't solve the larger problem," Velhairs replied. "The packs are targeting anyone who doesn't conform to their narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. If we flee, we abandon everyone else who lacks the means to escape." Then what do you propose? We stand, the vampire said simply. We make it clear that love and family take many forms, and that those forms deserve protection from those who would destroy them out of fear and ignorance. The war came to them 3 weeks later, not as a single massive assault but as a series of escalating attacks designed to test their defenses and resolve. First came the economic warfare. Trade routes to the castle were cut off, supply lines disrupted, and neighboring communities pressured to refuse them service. Then came the psychological attacks. Propaganda spread throughout supernatural communities, painting Ash as a corrupted deviant who preyed on children, and Velhairs as a manipulative monster who used forbidden magic to twist natural bonds. The lies were designed to isolate them from potential allies and justify whatever violence might follow. Finally came the direct confrontation. On the night of the new moon, when Ash's blood magic was at its weakest, an army of werewolves surrounded the Crystal Castle. At their head rode Kalar himself, now bearing the title of High Alpha and leading a coalition of packs united in their hatred of what they saw as abomination. Ash Rain of the Silver Moon Pack. Keeler's voice boomed across the castle grounds, magically amplified to carry over the wind. You have been tried in absentia and found guilty of treason against your species. Surrender yourself for justice, and we will spare the vampire and the child. Ash stood on the castle's highest tower, Velhairs beside him and Ilian safely hidden in the depths of the fortress. The sight of his former fated mate leading an army against them should have filled him with fear or despair, but instead he felt only a cold anger and crystalline clarity about what needed to be done. What justice is there in murdering a child for the crime of existing? Ash called back, his own voice enhanced by the magic that was slowly returning to him. What honor is there in destroying families that threaten no one but your rigid beliefs? You have chosen corruption over purity, Kalar replied. The consequences are your own responsibility. Then let's settle this the old way, Ash said, making a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Single combat. If you win, I'll surrender myself. If I win, you leave our lands and never return. The challenge sent murmurs through both armies. Single combat was an ancient tradition among werewolves, one that even the most militant packs couldn't honorably refuse. But the terms were unusual. Typically, such contests were between alphas, not between an alpha and a supposedly broken omega. You are not even a true omega anymore, Kalar said, but Ash could hear uncertainty in his voice. What are you? I am what you made me, Ash replied, and what I chose to become despite your making. The combat took place in the courtyard between the castle and the werewolf army, witnessed by hundreds of fighters from both sides. Kalar fought with all the skill and power that had made him legendary among his kind, his alpha strength and speed giving him every possible advantage. But Ash had changed since his exile. His magic, reborn through suffering and strengthened by love, was no longer the pure blood magic of his youth. It had become something new, something that combined the ancient power of his bloodline with the protective fury of chosen family. Silver light wreathed his hands as he fought, and his physical form seemed to shift and flow like moonlight itself. The battle was fierce but brief. When it ended, Kalar lay defeated in the courtyard dust, his golden hair matted with blood and his amber eyes wide with shock. He had expected to face the broken omega he had rejected years before, not this transformed being who fought with the power of conviction and love. How? Kalar gasped as Ash stood over him, the silver light still crackling around his fingers. You broke what I was, Ash replied, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. But in doing so, you freed me to become what I was meant to be. Not your fated mate, not your Pax Omega, but myself. He turned to address the assembled werewolf army, his voice ringing with authority that none of them could deny. I was cast out for being different, for not fitting your narrow definitions of what an omega should be. But difference is not weakness, and love is not corruption. The family I have built here, the bonds I have chosen, they are as real and as worthy as any recognized by your laws. Some of the wolves began to shift uncomfortably, his words striking deeper than they wanted to admit. How many of them had their own secrets, their own desires that didn't align with pack expectations? You can continue this war, Ash continued, and in doing so, you can destroy countless innocent lives in service to your fear. Or you can choose to accept that love takes many forms, and that those forms deserve protection rather than persecution. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but it was Ilian who broke the stalemate. The young boy emerged from the castle despite explicit orders to remain hidden, his mixed heritage making him visible to every werewolf present. "Please don't hurt my parents," he said, his child's voice somehow carrying clearly across the courtyard. "They saved me when no one else would. They gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. Isn't that what families are supposed to do?" The simple honesty of the child's plea did what hours of argument could not. Several wolves in the army began to lower their weapons, their faces showing the conflict between their taught hatred and their natural protective instincts toward children. It was then that Velhairs chose to make his own declaration. The vampire stepped forward, his ancient power making the very air around him shimmer with otherworldly energy. "I have lived for over 1,000 years," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I have seen empires rise and fall, watched species flourish and die, observed the endless cycle of hatred and redemption that defines mortal existence. And in all that time, I have learned one fundamental truth. Love is the only force in this universe strong enough to create lasting change." He moved to stand beside Ash, his pale hand finding the werewolf's darker one. This wolf was cast out by his pack, rejected by his supposed fated mate, branded as broken and worthless. But he is the strongest, most compassionate person I have ever known. He saved a dying child, brought light into my eternal darkness, and showed me that even the coldest heart can learn to love again. The vampire's crimson eyes found Kalar among the crowd. "You discarded him when you should have treasured him. You declared him worthless when he was priceless. And now you come here with armies and threats, trying to destroy what you were too blind to see. We are not fated mates," Velhairs continued, his grip on Ash's hand tightening. "We are something better, chosen partners who decided to build a life together based on mutual respect, understanding, and love. We have created a family not through biological accident, but through conscious choice and daily commitment." The power of his words, combined with the visible bond between him and Ash, began to crack the certainty that had driven the werewolf coalition. These were not the monsters they had been told to expect, but people who loved each other and were willing to fight to protect their family. The final blow to the pack's unity came from an unexpected source. Elder Thorn, the same wolf who had branded Ash as broken years before, stepped forward from the army's ranks. "I have listened to these words," the old werewolf said, his voice heavy with the weight of his years, "and I am forced to confront a terrible truth. We may have been wrong." Gasps echoed through the army, but Elder Thorn continued despite the shock his words had caused. "I branded this young wolf as broken because he did not fit our expectations. But looking at him now, seeing the strength he has found, the family he has built, the love he has chosen, I begin to wonder who was truly broken in that exchange." The elder turned to address his fellow wolves. "We came here expecting to find corruption and abomination. Instead, we find a family that loves each other, protects each other, and chooses each other every day. Perhaps it is time to ask ourselves why that threatens us so deeply." The werewolf army began to fracture as individual wolves grappled with the implications of what they had witnessed. Some remained committed to their militant stance, but others began to question whether they were fighting against evil or simply against difference. Kalar, still on the ground but no longer restrained, struggled to sit up. His face was a mask of confusion and something that might have been grief. "I don't understand," he said, looking up at Ash with eyes that held none of their former arrogance. "I felt our bond that night. I felt how strong it could have been. But I was so afraid of what others would think, so terrified of appearing weak, that I destroyed something precious." "You were afraid," Ash agreed, his voice gentle despite everything that had passed between them. "And fear made you cruel. But you can choose differently now." "Can I?" Healer's voice was barely a whisper. "Can anyone come back from the things I've done, the hatred I've spread?" Everyone can choose to be better, Velhair said, surprising everyone by extending a hand to help the fallen alpha to his feet. The question is whether you will make that choice. What followed was not an immediate resolution, but the beginning of a long process of change that would reshape supernatural society. Some werewolf packs left the coalition, choosing to return to their territories and reconsider their positions. Others remained militant, but their support base had been significantly weakened. Kalar himself became an unexpected advocate for change within werewolf society. His defeat and subsequent enlightenment gave him a unique perspective on the damage caused by rigid traditionalism, and he began working to reform pack structures from within. "I can never undo the harm I caused you," he told Ash during a private conversation weeks after the confrontation. "But I can try to ensure that no one else suffers as you did because of ignorance and fear." "That's all any of us can do," Ash replied. "Try to leave the world a little better than we found it." The changes that followed were gradual but significant. Mixed relationships became more accepted, traditional hierarchies began to evolve, and the persecution of outcasts and half-bloods decreased dramatically. The Crystal Castle became a symbol of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over conflict. But perhaps more importantly, it became a home for a family that had chosen each other across every possible boundary. Ash, Velhairs, and Ilian settled into a life that was both extraordinary in its diversity and beautifully ordinary in its daily rhythms. "Do you ever regret it?" Velhairs asked one evening as they sat together in their private chambers, watching Ilian practice his shape-shifting abilities in the garden below. "Regret what?" Ash replied, though he knew what his partner was asking. "The path that brought you here, the rejection, the exile, the pain that led to this life." Ash considered the question seriously, as he always did when Velhairs asked something important. "I regret the pain," he said finally. "I regret the time we lost before finding each other. But I don't regret the journey, because without it, I never would have become who I am now. I never would have found you or Ilian, or this life we've built together. And if Kalar had accepted the bond that night, if you had become the Pax Omega as intended, then I would have lived someone else's life instead of my own," Ash said simply. "I would have been who they expected me to be instead of who I chose to become." Velhairs nodded, understanding the profound truth in those words. "I spent centuries in solitude because I was afraid of loss, afraid of pain, afraid of change. You taught me that some things are worth the risk. And you taught me that rejection is not the end of the story," Ash replied. "Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better chapter." Years passed, and their story became legend throughout supernatural communities. Not as a fairy tale with neat endings, but as proof that love could transcend species, that families could be chosen rather than assigned, and that the strongest bonds were often those forged in the fire of adversity. Ilian grew into a remarkable young man, his mixed heritage making him a bridge between different communities. He chose to dedicate his life to helping other outcasts and half-bloods find their place in the world, carrying forward the lessons he had learned from his chosen parents. "You saved me," he told them on the day he left to begin his own mission. "Now I want to save others." "You were never ours to save," Ash replied, embracing the young man who had become his son in every way that mattered. "You were always meant to save yourself. We just gave you a safe place to do it." The Crystal Castle continued to serve as a sanctuary for those who needed refuge from persecution or simply from loneliness. Ash and Velhairs opened their doors to anyone who needed help, creating a community that proved daily that difference was strength rather than weakness. As for their own relationship, it deepened and evolved with each passing year. The passion that had begun as mutual recognition of shared pain transformed into something richer and more complex. A partnership built on respect, understanding, and the daily choice to love each other despite, or perhaps because of, their differences. "We are an impossible couple," Velhairs observed one night as they lay together in their bed, watching the aurora dance across the northern sky through their window. "The best ones usually are," Ash replied, his head resting on the vampire's chest, listening to the heartbeat that had learned to beat again because of love. A rejected werewolf and an ancient vampire, raising a half-blood child and running a sanctuary for misfits. Velhairs continued, amusement coloring his voice. What would the storytellers make of us? Hopefully, Ash said, they would make us human, flawed and complicated and real, instead of perfect heroes who never struggle or doubt or make mistakes. And what would be the moral of our story? Ash was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. That love isn't about finding someone who completes you, he said finally. It's about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself, and that the families we choose can be just as powerful as the ones we're born into. A good moral, Velhairs agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Ash's head. One worth living by. Outside their window, the aurora continued its eternal dance, painting the sky in shades of silver and green. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the moon, its voice carrying across the wilderness like a song of longing and belonging. But inside the crystal castle, wrapped in the warmth of chosen love and hard-won peace, Ash and Velhairs had found something that no amount of fate or destiny could have provided. A love story written by their own hands, a family created by their own choices, and a home built on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The rejected Omega had become something far greater than any pack could have imagined. He had become himself completely and without apology. And in doing so, he had found not just love, but the kind of transformative connection that changes not only individuals but entire communities. Their story continued to unfold, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. And in a world that too often tried to force beings into narrow categories and predetermined roles, they stood as living proof that the most beautiful stories are often the ones that refuse to follow the script, that insist on writing their own endings, and that prove every day that love truly can conquer all, not through magic or destiny, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other, again and again, for all the days of their lives. The moon watched over them all, silver and eternal, blessing unions that transcended species and celebrating families that chose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over despair. And in the Crystal Castle, surrounded by the family they had built and the community they had created, Ash and Velhairs lived happily ever after. Not because their story had ended, but because they had learned that the best stories never really end at all. 5 years had passed since the great confrontation that had changed the supernatural world, and the Crystal Castle had evolved into something far beyond what any of them had originally envisioned. What had begun as a simple sanctuary for outcasts had become the heart of a new movement, a place where beings from across the realm came to learn about cooperation, acceptance, and the radical idea that love could transcend any boundary. Ash stood in what had once been the castle's armory, now converted into a vast meeting hall where representatives from dozens of supernatural communities gathered monthly to discuss their progress toward a more inclusive society. At 27, he had grown into his role as one of the movement's primary architects, his unique perspective as both a rejected Omega and a chosen family member making him invaluable in bridging the gaps between different communities. The morning session had been particularly challenging, with heated debates about interspecies adoption rights and the legal status of mixed-heritage children. But as Ash watched the various delegates, werewolves, vampires, fae, and others, working together to find solutions rather than simply arguing positions, he felt a deep satisfaction with how far they had all come. The Council of Elders from the Eastern Territories has formally requested membership, announced Sarah, a dragon shifter who served as the Alliance's primary diplomatic coordinator. They're prepared to adopt our inclusion protocols in exchange for mutual defense agreements. A murmur of excitement ran through the assembled delegates. The Eastern Territories represented some of the most traditional supernatural communities, and their willingness to join the Alliance marked a significant expansion of their influence. What changed their minds? Asked Marcus, a young werewolf who had arrived at the castle 6 months ago after being cast out by his pack for refusing an arranged mating. He now served as one of Ash's primary assistants in counseling newly arrived refugees. Necessity, Sarah replied with a wry smile. Human development has pushed deeper into their territories than ever before. They need allies who understand both supernatural needs and modern realities. Isolation is no longer a viable strategy. Ash nodded thoughtfully. The integration of supernatural communities with the rapidly changing human world was an ongoing challenge that required constant adaptation and innovation. Their alliance had become a model for how different species could work together while maintaining their unique identities and traditions. Schedule a formal meeting with their representatives, he decided. But make it clear that membership requires genuine commitment to our principles, not just convenient alliance during difficult times. As the morning session concluded and delegates began to disperse for lunch, Ash found himself approached by someone he hadn't expected to see. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human physician who had helped establish medical protocols for their mixed-species community. "Ash," she said, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of excitement and nervousness. "I need to speak with you and Velhairs privately. It's about Ilian." A chill ran down Ash's spine at the mention of their adopted son. Ilian was now 15, growing into a remarkable young man whose unique abilities continued to surprise everyone around him. But his mixed heritage also made him vulnerable to complications that purebloods never faced. They found Velhairs in his study, surrounded by ancient texts and modern research papers, as he worked on cataloging magical artifacts recovered from abandoned supernatural sites. The vampire looked up as they entered, his crimson eyes immediately focusing on Dr. Vasquez's expression. "What's wrong?" he asked without preamble, his immortal composure unable to hide his concern for their son. "Nothing's wrong exactly," Dr. Vasquez said quickly, "but something extraordinary is happening. Ilian's magical development is accelerating beyond anything I've seen in my research. His abilities are evolving in ways that suggest he might be the first of something entirely new." She pulled out a tablet displaying complex magical energy readings. "These are from his monthly checkup yesterday. His power levels have tripled in the past 6 months, and the patterns are unlike anything recorded for either werewolves or humans." Ash studied the data, his own understanding of blood magic allowing him to recognize some of the implications. He's not just developing werewolf abilities enhanced by human adaptability, he realized. He's developing something that combines both heritages into something completely unique. "Exactly," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "And there's more. I've been corresponding with colleagues at other sanctuaries, and they're reporting similar developments in other mixed heritage children. It seems like the new generation of cross-species offspring is evolving capabilities that transcend their parents' individual limitations." Velhairs leaned back in his chair, his ancient mind processing the implications. "Evolution in response to environmental pressure," he murmured. "The supernatural world is changing so rapidly that nature is creating beings specifically adapted to bridge the gaps between species." "Is it dangerous?" Ash asked, his parental instincts overriding his scientific curiosity. "Unknown," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "But based on what I've observed, Ilian seems to be handling the changes well. His emotional stability is excellent, his physical health is perfect, and his magical control is actually improving as his power increases. We should speak with him," Velhairs decided. "He deserves to understand what's happening to his body and his abilities." They found Ilian in the castle's extensive gardens, where he had created a small sanctuary for injured animals brought to him by local children. As they approached, they could see him kneeling beside a young deer whose leg had been caught in a trap, his hands glowing with the soft silver light that had become his signature magical manifestation. At 15, Ilian had grown tall and lean, his features a unique blend of human delicacy and werewolf strength. His dark hair carried subtle highlights that seemed to shift color in different light, and his eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom beyond his years. But it was his presence that truly marked him as special. A calm, centered energy that made others feel safe and accepted. "The healing is going well," he said without looking up as they approached. "She'll be able to return to the wild in a few days." "How did you know we were here?" Ash asked, settling on the grass beside his son. "I felt your emotions," Ilian replied, finally looking up with a smile. "Concern, curiosity, and that particular mix of pride and protectiveness that you both get when you're thinking about my future." The casual display of empathic abilities that exceeded even Ash's own gifts confirmed what Dr. Vasquez had told them. Ilian was indeed developing beyond the normal parameters of either of his parent species. "We need to talk about what's happening to you," Velhers said gently. "Dr. Vasquez has discovered some interesting things about your magical development." Ilian's expression grew more serious, but he showed no fear. "I know I'm changing," he said. "I can feel it happening, like something inside me is waking up and stretching after a long sleep. It doesn't hurt, but it's significant." Over the next hour, they explained what Dr. Vasquez had discovered, discussing the implications of his evolving abilities and what it might mean for his future. Ilian listened with the thoughtful attention that had always characterized him, asking intelligent questions and processing the information with remarkable maturity. "So I'm not just a half-blood anymore," he said finally. "I'm something new." "You're exactly what you were always meant to be," Ash said firmly. "The labels don't matter. What matters is that you're healthy, happy, and becoming the person you choose to be." "But I might be the first of a new kind of being," Ilian continued, his young mind grappling with the magnitude of the concept. "That's both exciting and terrifying. Being the first of anything usually is," Velhers observed. "But you're not facing it alone. We'll support you through whatever comes, and we'll make sure you have the resources and guidance you need to handle your gifts responsibly." That evening, as they shared dinner in their family quarters, the conversation turned to more immediate concerns. Ilian had been expressing interest in traveling beyond the castle's immediate territory, meeting other young people like himself and learning about the broader supernatural world. "There's a gathering planned for next month," he mentioned casually over dessert. "Other mixed-heritage young people from across the continent are coming together to share experiences and learn from each other. I'd like to attend." Ash felt his protective instincts flare. Despite all the progress they had made in changing supernatural society, there were still plenty of communities that viewed mixed-heritage individuals with suspicion or outright hostility. "Where is this gathering being held?" Velhers asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The Moonrise Academy in the southern provinces," Ilian replied. "It's a new school specifically designed for young people who don't fit into traditional categories. They've invited me to speak about my experiences here at the castle." Ash exchanged a glance with his partner. The Moonrise Academy was well regarded among progressive supernatural educators, but it was also located in territory controlled by several conservative werewolf packs. "I know what you're both thinking," Ilian said with the perceptiveness that continued to surprise them. "You're worried about the risks, the potential dangers, the possibility that someone might try to hurt me because of what I represent. Can you blame us?" Ash asked. "You're our son, and the world can be dangerous for people who are different." "But I can't spend my whole life hiding in safety," Ilian replied gently. "And more importantly, there are other young people out there who need to know they're not alone, that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. Isn't that part of what you've been working toward all these years?" The question struck at the heart of everything they had built at the Crystal Castle. How could they advocate for acceptance and integration while keeping their own son isolated from the world they were trying to change? "He's right," Velhers said quietly. "We can't protect him from everything, and we shouldn't try. But we can make sure he's prepared for whatever he might encounter." What followed was an intensive month of preparation that involved the entire castle community. Ilian received advanced training in defensive magic from Velhers, emotional shielding techniques from Ash, and practical safety protocols from their security staff. More importantly, he spent time with other young residents of the castle, learning from their experiences and sharing his own insights. "Remember," Ash told him the night before his departure, "you don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who isn't willing to see it. And you can always come home if you need to." "I know," Ilian replied, embracing both his parents. "But I also know that I carry part of both of you with me wherever I go. The strength you taught me, the love you showed me, the example you set. I won't forget any of that." The Moonrise Academy gathering proved to be a transformative experience for Ilian and many other young attendees. For 3 weeks, mixed heritage individuals from across the supernatural world came together to share their stories, develop their abilities, and build connections that would last for years to come. Regular communications from Ilion painted a picture of remarkable young people who were indeed evolving beyond their parents' individual species limitations. Dragonfey hybrids who could manipulate both fire and plant growth, vampire-werewolf crosses who combined immortal strength with pack bonds, and dozens of other unique combinations that challenged every traditional category. "We're calling ourselves the Bridge Generation," Ilion wrote in one of his letters. "We're not just mixed heritage individuals struggling to fit in. We're the foundation for a new kind of supernatural society where the lines between species become resources rather than barriers." But the gathering also faced external challenges. Conservative factions from various supernatural communities organized protests outside the academy, demanding that the abominations be disbanded and their unnatural abilities be suppressed through magical binding or worse. The crisis came to a head during the final week of the gathering when a group of militant werewolves attempted to storm the academy grounds. The attack was repelled by the combined efforts of the students and faculty, but not before several young people were injured and the academy's protective wards were seriously damaged. "We need to evacuate," the academy's director informed parents and guardians during an emergency communication. "The attacks are escalating, and we can't guarantee the students' safety if they remain here." Ash and Velhairs were preparing to leave immediately for the southern provinces when an unexpected message arrived at the Crystal Castle. It was from Kalar, the Alpha who had rejected Ash years before and who had since become an advocate for supernatural reform. "I know we have a complicated history," Keeler's message read, "but I'm currently in the southern provinces working with local authorities to address the extremist threats. I can provide additional security for the academy evacuation if you trust me to help protect your son." The request forced Ash to confront feelings he thought he had fully resolved. Kalar had indeed changed since their confrontation, working tirelessly to reform werewolf society from within and often putting himself at personal risk to protect those he had once helped persecute. But trusting him with Ilion's safety felt like an enormous leap. "What do you think?" Ash asked Velhairs as they discussed their options. "I think," the vampire replied carefully, "that sometimes the people who have the most reason to prove themselves are the ones who try the hardest to do the right thing. And right now, Ilion needs all the protection he can get." They accepted Keeler's offer, and the Alpha's response exceeded every expectation. He arrived at the academy with a mixed force of reformed werewolves, progressive vampires, and allied Fey warriors, creating a protective corridor that allowed all the students to evacuate safely. More importantly, Keeler's presence sent a powerful message to the extremist factions. The old guard was changing, and many former enemies were now working together to protect the next generation. "Thank you," Ash told Kalar when they were reunited at a safe house in neutral territory. "I know this wasn't easy for you, given our history." "My history is full of mistakes," Kalar replied, his amber eyes showing none of their former arrogance. "The least I can do is try to prevent others from repeating them." As they traveled back to the Crystal Castle together, Ash had the opportunity to observe how much both he and Kalar had changed over the years. The Alpha who had once embodied everything Ash had tried to escape was now genuinely committed to creating a better world for the next generation. "I've been thinking about something you said during our confrontation," Kalar mentioned during one of their evening conversations, "about how I chose fear over love, safety over vulnerability. You were right, and it cost me everything that mattered." "You've built a new life since then," Ash pointed out. "Your work with the reform movement has saved countless lives." "But I'm still alone," Kalar said quietly. "I've spent so long trying to make amends for my past mistakes that I forgot how to build something positive for my future." The conversation stayed with Ash long after they returned to the Crystal Castle. Over the following weeks, as Ilion settled back into his routine and shared stories of his experiences with the Bridge Generation, Ash found himself thinking about the nature of redemption and second chances. It was Velhairs who finally raised the subject directly. "You've been thinking about Kalar," the vampire observed one evening as they sat together in their private chambers. "Is it that obvious?" Ash asked with a rueful smile. "Only to someone who knows you as well as I do," Velhairs replied. "What are you thinking about?" Ash was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "I keep thinking about how lonely he seemed, how much he's changed, and how much good he's doing now. and I wonder if there's a way to help him find the same kind of peace and happiness we've found together. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Velhers asked, his tone carefully neutral. I don't know what I'm suggesting, Ash admitted. I just know that he's not the same person who rejected me all those years ago, and he deserves a chance at happiness just like everyone else. What followed was a series of long conversations between Ash and Velhers about the possibility of expanding their relationship to include Kalar. It was a complex discussion that touched on everything from practical logistics to deep emotional vulnerabilities. Our relationship works because we chose each other freely, Velhers pointed out. Any expansion would have to be based on the same foundation of mutual choice and genuine affection. But is it possible? Ash asked. Could you see yourself caring for him the way you care for me? Velhers considered the question seriously. I've watched him work over the past few years, seen how committed he is to making amends for his past. He's not the arrogant alpha who rejected you. He's become someone worthy of respect. And if you believe he could be worthy of love as well, I think he could be, Ash said softly. I think under all that guilt and self-punishment, he's someone who could learn to love and be loved again. The decision to invite Kalar to visit the Crystal Castle was not made lightly. They spent weeks discussing the possibility with Ilian, who had his own complicated feelings about the alpha who had played such a destructive role in his father's past. If he makes you happy, then I support it, Ilian said finally. Both of you have taught me that family comes in many forms, and love doesn't follow rules. If your hearts are big enough to include him, then so is mine. Keeler's response to their invitation was a mixture of hope and terror that was almost painful to witness. Are you certain about this? He asked during their initial conversation. I don't want to disrupt the beautiful life you've built together. We're not looking to disrupt anything, Ash replied. We're looking to expand it, if that's something you want as well. What followed was a careful courtship that was unlike anything any of them had experienced before. Kalar visited the castle regularly, spending time with their family and community, contributing to their work, and slowly building relationships with both Ash and Velhers. The process was complicated by the weight of history and the complexity of creating a three-way relationship where two of the participants had such a painful shared past. But gradually, genuine affection began to develop alongside the practical compatibility they had already established. I never imagined this was possible, Kalar said one evening as the three of them sat together in the castle's observatory, watching the stars well overhead, not just being forgiven, but being welcomed into the very family I once tried to destroy. Forgiveness is just the beginning, Ash replied. What we're building now is something entirely new, something that belongs to all of us. The integration of Kalar into their family unit took months of careful negotiation and constant communication. There were difficult conversations about boundaries, expectations, and the practical realities of managing a relationship between three very different individuals with complex histories. But there were also moments of unexpected joy and connection. Velhers and Kalar discovered a shared love of strategic games and ancient history. Ash found that his feelings for Kalar were genuinely evolving beyond forgiveness into something warmer and more intimate. And Ilian, with the adaptability of youth, quickly accepted his third father as a natural addition to their family. We're definitely not traditional, Velhers observed one morning as he watched Kalar teaching Ilian advanced werewolf combat techniques, while Ash prepared breakfast for their extended household. When have we ever been traditional? Ash replied with a laugh. A rejected Omega, an ancient vampire, a mixed heritage teenager, and now a reformed alpha. We're probably the strangest family in supernatural history. And the happiest, Kalar added, joining the conversation as he and Ilian finished their training session. At least I am happier than I ever thought I deserved to be. The formal bonding ceremony that united all three of them took place on the anniversary of Ash's original rejection, transforming a day of painful memory into one of celebration and renewal. Representatives from across the supernatural world attended, making it not just a personal milestone but a powerful symbol of how much their society had changed. Today we celebrate not just the union of three individuals, Elder Thorne said as he officiated the ceremony, but the triumph of love over fear, choice over destiny, and hope over despair. These three have shown us that the strongest bonds are not those imposed by fate, but those chosen freely and maintained through commitment and understanding. As they exchanged vows, each promising to love, honor, and support the others through whatever challenges might come, Ash felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with finding missing pieces and everything to do with choosing to build something beautiful together. "I love you both," he said as they stood together before their community. "Not because I have to, not because fate demands it, but because you have both chosen to be worthy of love every single day." Their expanded family proved to be even more effective at creating positive change in the supernatural world. Keeler's connections within werewolf society, combined with Velhair's ancient wisdom and Ash's gift for healing emotional trauma, created a powerful force for transformation that reached into communities across the continent. The Crystal Castle became not just a sanctuary for outcasts, but a model for how different kinds of beings could not only coexist but thrive together. Their success inspired the creation of similar communities throughout the supernatural world, each adapted to local conditions but based on the same fundamental principles of acceptance, choice, and love. "We've started something bigger than ourselves," Ash observed one evening as they reviewed reports from their allied communities. "Something that will continue long after we're gone." "The best kind of legacy," Velhairs agreed. "Not monuments to our own importance, but living proof that change is possible when people are willing to choose love over fear." As the years continued to pass and their community continued to grow and evolve, Ash often reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. From his rejection and exile to the building of a new kind of family, from his despair and self-doubt to his current role as a leader in the movement for supernatural equality, every step had been necessary to create the life they now shared. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Kalar asked one night as they lay together in their shared bed, the three of them arranged in comfortable intimacy that had become as natural as breathing. "If I had been accepted instead of rejected, you mean?" Ash considered the question. "I think I would have lived someone else's life instead of my own. I would have been the Omega the pack expected me to be instead of becoming the person I chose to be. And I would have remained the arrogant alpha who thought strength was about dominance rather than service," Kalar added. "I never would have learned what real love looks like. And I would have continued my solitary existence," Velhairs concluded, "preserving knowledge for a world that might never benefit from it, growing more isolated with each passing century." "So we're all exactly where we're supposed to be," Ash said with satisfaction. "Not because fate brought us together, but because we chose to build something beautiful from the pieces of our broken pasts." Outside their window, the moon continued its eternal journey across the star-filled sky, its silver light blessing a world that was slowly but surely learning that love truly could transcend any boundary, that families could be chosen rather than assigned, and that the most powerful magic of all was the simple decision to see others not as threats to be feared, but as potential sources of joy, growth, and connection. Their story continued to unfold, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. And in a world that was finally beginning to understand that difference was strength rather than weakness, they stood as living proof that the most beautiful families are often the ones that refuse to follow traditional patterns, that insist on writing their own definitions of love and belonging, and that prove every day that when people choose to see past their fears and prejudices, miracles are not only possible but inevitable.